Good evening, everyone, and a very warm welcome to our webinar all about single-handed ocean crossing. I'm Paul Knox-Johnston, the Sales and Marketing Manager for the Heaving Knox-Johnston family, which is made up of Heaving Knox-Johnston, Heaving Knox-Johnston Specialist, and Heaving Knox-Johnston Commercial. We hope with those three brands we can cover your insurance, whether you're a sailor who potters around the coast, one like Martin here who goes off on single-handed adventures, or whether you're the marina that the boats are moored in, and most things in between. I'm going to be your host for this evening's webinar. So, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Martin Sutcliffe to come and talk to us all about offshore single-handed sailing.
Paul, what a fantastic welcome. Thank you so much. What an exciting evening. I'm really looking forward to it. And thank you to all your audience for joining us. Let me do the tricky bit and see if I can get the slides to come up and stop you and Kate having a heart attack.
It's done.
It's done. Great. Well, that's the first hurdle over. From that, we can dive into the meat of the evening. And as you said, let's consider this a chat. Thank you. Thank you for everybody for joining us. I know there's Olympics on and EastEnders, but you've made the right choice. You're here tonight. So a big thank you for doing that. I hope I give you the chance to have an honest and insightful, let's call it a chat, because we will get to your questions, maybe along the way or maybe at the end. But look, I've got to stress something right from the start. Paul mentioned experts on lithium and this, that, and the other. I am not an expert. Hopefully, I'm a bit like the audience. And this is more about how did I get to this point, thinking about going offshore, and how did I make those first steps to sailing offshore and solo offshore? What I intend to do is try and share with you my practical experience, some of the lessons I learned, in the hope that you won't have to learn from your mistakes. You can learn from mine, which is much better. But I do stress, I'm not saying you should do any of this. That's entirely up to you. What I'm just sharing is I was trying to figure out how to venture offshore, both solo ultimately. And maybe if you're thinking about how you push the boundaries of your sailing, maybe I'll spot some ideas. If not, well, maybe I'll entertain you. But anyway, I hope we have a good evening together. Look, I started this with the comment, am I a real sailor? And look, I know it's a ridiculous question, an utterly ridiculous question in so many ways. We figure out who we are as sailors, but this one was stuck in my head. And somehow I wanted to try and figure out the answer. To me, the real sailor was, somebody disappears across the horizon, offshore, probably on their own. And that was my definition. You pick your own. As I say, ridiculous. But anyway, how do I find the answer? Well, in the end, it was a journey. And like most journeys, let's probably start near the beginning. And I want to give you a bit of context because there's not a lot of point me just diving off into my offshore experience if you don't know a little bit about the journey and give you a little bit of context to it. So let's start at the beginning. Why then? Well, okay. No, I haven't got the wrong presentation. I share these pictures with you because it tells you something about me. As well as sailing, I absolutely love paragliding, something I started at the ridiculous age of 50. I was probably the only one there with grey hair. And this picture shows you the Eiger on the left and about 3,000 meters in the air and Verbier Valley. I happen to live in Switzerland. I'm a Brit, but I live in Switzerland. So I enjoy paragliding. So I'm not afraid to do things that others would definitely call dangerous. I can manage, or I actually thrive on a good dose of adrenaline, but I'm cautious. At 50, you know yourself. For me, it's all about managing risk. And I always say to myself, like, if you don't like it, I can fly another day. So just managing that risk. And now you're going, hang on a minute, this guy seems like some nutcase. I'm not going to listen to him. Hang on a minute. If you're going, if he's that adventurous, why do you have these doubts about being a real sailor? Well, it's a fair question. They go back quite a long way, if I'm honest. It goes back to the days of my day skipper practical. No, this isn't where I did it. This is a picture of Izmir, Turkey, or close by. But the sea state here is exactly the same as when me and my wife, Sarah, did our man overboard drill in the Solent on our day skipper course. All week, the weather was like this, and we still got our little certificate. So you can see, we felt a little fraudulent. So it was early days. And then after that, like many others, I suspect, the Mediterranean, is where we as a family spent most of our time sailing. Apart from a week course I did crossing the Channel and back, we would typically have 2 weeks flotilla as a family, then advancing to charter and bareboat, etc., over a few years with the children as they grew up. And so up until retirement, I probably only had 6 months sailing experience, and all of it here in the Mediterranean. And even though I know the Med is underestimated in terms of challenging sailing, as anybody who's battled the Meltemi will know, even then, I suggest my doubts about am I a real sailor were not entirely unfounded. But then, for whatever reason, 2015, I thought, okay, I'm going to have to buy a boat. I bought a boat, my first boat. It's still my first boat, a Malo 39, built in 1999. Great price in Homeris, which is an area I knew well. So I bought the boat. I didn't sail probably more than 2, maybe 3 weeks a year, having bought a boat. Maybe not the best solution, but anyway. So I was still working. But I did learn a huge amount about this particular boat. The good stuff and the not so good stuff. 10 years on, I know she's not the perfect boat, but then does such a thing really exist? I don't know. Probably not. So moving on, 2019, I retired. Yeah, finally free at last, not lashed to the corporate life any longer. And I can honestly say I didn't look back for 1 second. I knew what I wanted to do when I retired, and that was more sailing. And I was lucky to have an understanding wife. So that year, my wife, Sarah, and I sailed from Athens to Istanbul, my favorite city possibly in the world. And it was truly special to sail, to see the Blue Mosque from the sea, sail up to the entrance to the Bosphorus. And then I worked my way back from there, initially solo, and then picked up some family back to Athens. That was my first year of retirement. Again, I'm giving you some context. So anybody joining late going, where's the offshore stuff? It's coming. I'm just giving you a little bit of context. The following year, we did a great sailing trip. We went from, again, with my wife initially, to Athens. Lovely trip around the Peloponnese into Kalamata. Sarah said, that's enough for me. You go off and do what you want. And so I was alone, started building some solo miles, working my way round towards Sicily. And at that stage, I was starting to get a pretty good solo boat handling, taking it into the marinas, even doing stern to mooring, all that stuff, and managing the boat. So I had a pretty good handle on that. But I definitely had some things missing. I'd seen strong winds in the Med, as most people will have done, certainly over 30 plus knots, but not sustained. And clearly I hadn't been in the open ocean. Bits of the Med are open, but I hadn't been in big open bits. I had limited night sailing experience and definitely very little no arrival and departure experience in the dark. And obviously overnight solo I hadn't done, and multiple nights sailing I hadn't done at all. But I thought I could fill those gaps step at a time. So the first one was, okay, how do you conquer the dark? I'd sailed in the dark across the channel with a group, but not on my own. And I knew it could be incredibly disorientating. And then I was working my way, as I said, towards Sicily. I reached this spot, 70 miles, no chance of doing that in daylight. And so obviously I needed to do some of it in the dock. So I thought, probably best to leave in the dock from a place I know, or at least I thought I knew, rather than arrive somewhere I didn't know in the dock. So cast off at 4 a.m., no problems, everything fine. Went out of the harbour, but didn't spot that one of the entry lights, the starboard entry light into the harbour as you're approaching on a gantry, was collapsed. I hadn't registered, I slightly registered on the way in, but what I didn't realize is it was going to be more significant on the way out. So I left in the dark, saw all these fishing ships, got distracted, turned a little bit, looked back, turned a little bit, got distracted, thought, okay, ready to go, reached down to check, hit my autopilot with 70 miles to sail solo, and it didn't work. And then I thought, oh, I better go back. Looked around, no sign of the harbour entrance, nothing. And it was because of that missing light, and I'd drifted round the corner. But anyway, I thought, okay, no choice, just get on with it. So I headed off and self-steered for a while, and the rest of it. Eventually, I got the autopilot to work, and finally, it was fine. Everything was okay. But I'll share some lessons. A lesson learned that night or early morning was, if in doubt, in the dark, stay as far away from land as possible. And second lesson is have a reliable autopilot. So the lessons were starting. Then I kept going. We can fast forward a little bit. I was now on northern Sicily, heading across to Sardinia. Again, I wouldn't building some experience here to share with you where this leads offshore. So I had this next. So it's first solo overnight. This was further than even to this until this year. This is the furthest I'd ever sailed solo. 160 miles. It took about 33 hours. It was pretty uneventful, quite a bit of motoring. I used the AIS a lot for watching what shipping was coming. The weather was great because it was summer or autumn. I could nap in the cockpit, but it took me 33 hours to do this, and I definitely learnt that I needed to be able to rest. I'd obviously replaced the autopilot by then, but yeah, napping in the cockpit is fine in the med for a few minutes, 20 minutes for 33 hours. But if you're going to do a bit more, you can't sustain that. So I learned, and I got tired. I realized I was tired, and I started to make some mistakes. So another lesson. By 2023, we were past COVID, work was well behind me. I was like, oh, am I ever going to get out of the Mediterranean? And the boat was overwintering in Arbatax, great spot. If anybody knows it, I really recommend it. Managed to get some work done on the boat, installed some lithium batteries myself, started to get some miles under the keel. And then I could see now I could get some miles done. It was really a year of three halves. I went from Sardinia, Sardinia to Corsica, by way of Elba, Capraia up to Genoa, then Genoa along to Barcelona, and then Barcelona on to Valencia. That was that year, really. The first half, I was lucky. I had a crew member who never complained, thought I was a brilliant skipper. So that was a little quick. The cockapoo, but I was company, but still solo, if you like. And then the second half, we went from Genoa, worked our way along the coast. If I work through these pictures, this is top right and bottom right is working our way along the Italian and French coast from Genoa into Monte Carlo, of course. Fabulous stop. Islands at Toulon, and then into a very grey Marseille. So that was with crew. And then from there on, we went across with my brother. The partners left us, and we went across the Gulf of Lyon, which is huge, actually, and overnight with my brother. So that was another build of nighttime sailing into Roses. Great spot. The Dolly Museum is not very far away. And then along to Barcelona. So Now in Barcelona, so I've done more trying to build some experience, and in Barcelona, I'm back to being on my own again. Trying to build those solo skills, if you like, step at a time, kind of minimizing some of not taking too bigger steps, but pushing myself along the way. So, excuse me, I'm going to take a quick sip. Working my way along, trying to get out of the Mediterranean. Everybody else is going the other direction, of course. So I was in Barcelona, and you can see the planned route off to Menorca solo, and then around them, enjoy those islands, and on to Valencia. So I'm now back solo again and overnight. And by now I'm a bit more relaxed. None of the heebie-jeebies, panic, the rest of it. And you can see here it's pretty calm. So I motored an awful lot again, not an awful lot of sailing. So I still had this niggling doubt about managing sails solo at night, or even manage them with crew at night. I haven't even done that. So quite a few doubts still. But I definitely learned that trip. It can be really enjoyable. Being alone across at night, if the conditions are right, is just fabulous. AIS I really learned, was hugely valuable. At night, I still remember to this day watching this tanker off to my port side and not really being able to tell, was he just running almost parallel with me, or was he cutting in front of me? And the AIS solved that one. And simple stuff like you can see here in this picture, the instruments are pretty bright, and there's still some daylight, so they were really bright when it was dark, which ruined my vision. So you've got to be able to know the basics of how to sort out your instruments, have them bright, have them dim, all that type of stuff. So simple learnings. And then I had a great time around Minorca, super time. And then this one's worth dwelling on for a minute, because this, to this day, remains my toughest passage. So I probably need to explain a few things. I was on the end of Mallorca here, and I'd basically booked a place for the end to overwinter in Valencia. And it was getting into November. I was like, I'm ready to go home. I'd been sheltering from one monster storm that hit Palma, and I ran off to the other end of the island to shelter. And I'd been waiting there, and I spotted this weather window, which actually turned out to be a little on the small side. I thought, okay, I'm going to go for it. And so I had some smart thinking here. I thought, I know the weathers could turn, so I'm not going to go straight across. I'm going to go down to along Ibiza. If things get really gnarly, I can tuck into Ibiza. And if they don't, I can carry on and I can jibe probably down towards Valencia. But what happened was, I'd had an intermittent engine problem, which was in the background. I went along the coast of Mallorca and then went out across. Wait, where's the wind? Where's the wind? Where's the wind? And then wham, I got whacked. It wasn't the wind that was such a problem, but in the Med, it was the 2.5 meter swell waves with a really short period that were really making me anxious. Then I heard a gale warning, could see on the AIS some pretty big ships heading for shelter on Ibiza. And I thought, I better do the same thing. But what I'd failed to do, I kind of made a plan B, saying going along Ibiza, but I hadn't done my research about how to get in. So I found myself trying to heave to in the dark, in whatever conditions, looking at the guide, the pilot book, trying to find a place to try and get into. And I'd never entered any port in the dark, let alone an unknown one. So I heaved to, had some problems heaving to, on and on and on. Anyway, long story short, I got in, learned about some things about heaving to, managed to enter the harbour, and at the last minute, I could see some lights of anchored boats, and I thought, hang on a minute, what else is in here? I managed to get my torch out and just got out in time to avoid slamming straight into some small motorboats on buoys in the harbour. So that was quite a night, I have to say. It was the worst night I've ever had. And I learnt there's some really tough lessons. It knocked my confidence for sure, but I was pressured by time. I'd been waiting. I wanted to get home. I'd spotted a chance and the window was too small. I've checked the wind, but I hadn't really paid enough attention to the sea state. The sea state was classic med, 2 meters plus, but a really short period. So short, choppy waves, which really was really uncomfortable and concerning. I hadn't made a good plan B. I thought about it, but I hadn't really done my research, and I should have done. And then when I woke up in the morning, I'd been running the engine because in this rough weather, because I was concerned about an intermittent issue with the engine. And then the next morning, all the filters were clogged because all the gunk in the bottom of the tank had churned up and clogged the filters. I did my best to clean them out. I could start the engine, but we'll come back to that, and maybe we have it in the chat. If you haven't had a diesel issue, you will, unless you've got a drain on the bottom of your diesel tank. I learned, I heaved to in many different conditions, but that was a tough night. I learned dropping the mainsail for my boat and just heaving to under the jib was a better option. I learned that the hard way. Have a strong torch. Thank goodness I did, otherwise I'd have gone straight into the back of some motorboats. And yeah, it knocked my confidence. But after a while, it really left me with questions. But then again, I thought, you've actually coped. You came out of it and you managed it and you sorted the problems out. So over time, that maybe built my confidence. So I kept going the next year. And by the time it came to the summer of 2024, I'd finally worked my way out of the med. Overwintered in the Algarve and Portugal. And so there I was, sitting pretty out of the med with all of the Atlantic beckoning. And I'm going, now what? And I still, after all of what you've just heard, and I built experience, I still had these nagging doubts. What about offshore? Multiple days, I'd done overnights, I'd done 33 hours, but that's not 4 days, 5 days, 6 days, go on and on. Can I sleep? Yeah, can I cat nap, but could I get some real sleep? What about the food? What about the weather, etc.? Insurance, could I get insured for single-handed, etc., etc.? I had loads of questions still. Am I a real, can I go offshore? How do I take that next step? So, well, the boat was in the Algarve, so I'm in a good spot. I was looking for somewhere 4 or 5 days would be great. I didn't want to go across the Atlantic on my own, or even with crew, frankly. I just wanted to go and figure out, could I do it? Did I like it? So I was looking for somewhere a little shorter, 4 or 5 days. Could I get a crew? If I could get a crew, great. But I know it's hard for crews to commit. So could I do it on my own if they backed out? So not too far. And as it happened, I thought, I did research. I went, yep, this is it. This is it. I found it. Maybe some of you recognize it. Do you? Yeah, it's Porto. This is Porto Santo, close to Madeira, very close to Madeira. So I've thought it was a perfect distance, 450 miles, maybe 4 days, maybe a bit less, maybe a bit more. So there was my destination for my first offshore. Okay, what about the boat? Is the boat in good enough order? As I said, she was from 1999, so she's getting on a little bit, not so much for a boat like that, but I'd kept her in good order, loads of spares, even a spare starter motor, good medical kit, I'd had a new life raft in 2023. This is now beginning 25. Radar, new radar. My old radar was ancient. A new radar in 24. I didn't have a wind vane, and I had no means of getting weather at sea. I just got the weather. And for 4 or 5, 10 days, it's probably okay. But the rigging was a bit old. Rigging was 10 years old, and the insurance company said, you need to replace the rigging. Can't be more than 10 years old. I was a bit gutted by that, but honestly, that's actually pretty smart. I mean, you'd look pretty stupid, wouldn't you, if they'd said that and then your mast came down because of faulty rigging. And what's the price of that compared to a life? Anyway, so I replaced the rigging. They did a fabulous job. I thought, well, I haven't dropped the anchor in 10 years. Probably the previous owner might not drop, anchor, rudder. Better check it's in fit enough state for the Orcas to have a nibble at, and it was in fabulous condition. So there's nothing wrong with the rudder. All was fine there. So the boat was in good spot. So then I'm like, oh, great. Got me. I'm okay. I think the boat's fine. Can I find some crew? And I was really lucky through the cruise. No, that's the other guy. Through the cruising association, I found my first mate, Alan. We'd met via the cruising association in Sicily, as both of us were members, and we bumped into each other and we kept good contact. And kindly, Alan said, "Yeah, sure, I'll come with you." We hadn't sailed together. He's a Sealand sailor, done an Atlantic crossing, and brought things like great ginger cake, inReach Mini, which was invaluable to keep in contact with people. He was a vet or a retired vet. So if I had any medical conditions or needed neutering mid-Atlantic, I was in safe hands. He was brilliant. Alan was a great crew member. I'm so indebted to him. So now this is the first step offshore we're talking about, for me at least, not for him. Just the two of us. We did our route planning. Portimao, we were out to Porto Santo. It's about 480 miles. We didn't really contemplate diverting to the African coast, so we didn't talk about that. Whether we should have done, I don't know. We really thought, well, we'll go or we won't go. We'll either make it or we'll turn around and come back. And the only other thing to think about was the traffic separation zone, just outside of Portimao, off the tip of the Portuguese coast of the Algarve there. So we just wanted to cross that in daylight. That was about our only passage planning. We did the provisioning, cooking, which I find a complete pain in the butt. But anyway, we did it. We cooked some meals. We were never going to go hungry. We did things like sorting out the watch pattern, totally new to me. Just again, the two of us, we opted for the 4 hours on, 4 hours off. And then we did that. We watched the weather for several days, which was actually quite stressful, for me at least, because Alan had said, "You're the boss, you're the skipper." He was great for advice, but he was also clear it was my call ultimately. And then off we went. There's really little to report. I'm going to reflect on what I learned because this was the first offshore passage. And yeah, there was not a lot to say. I'm not going to dwell on it because that's the boring bit to share with you. You will have seen some of that. You have done it. But we set up. We were lucky that we had a full moon some of the way, so it was a real plus. The forecast was for a bit of wind to start, good winds following in the first day 2, day 3, and then dropping off towards the end. Very little wind towards the end, and that was planned because soon after that there was strong winds to forecast to arrive as we were due to forecast to come in just as we were due to arrive. And this is the approach to Porto Santo. As I said, the forecast said it would be calm, but we didn't expect this. This was like life of pi, mid-Atlantic, 450 miles, almost 500 miles into the Atlantic, and it's completely flat calm. And Porto Santo was absolute gem. So it was about 3.5 days for us. That's Porto Santo in the background. You can see it was just flat calm. We had a turtle, a dolphin. It was just an amazing arrival. And for a first offshore passage, yeah, I was a bit disappointed to motor so much. But for a first offshore, just the two of us, for just under 4 days, I was probably happy it was like that and not the opposite, which would have probably scared the life out of me. So here we are. We made it. Delighted in Porto Santo. We explored the island, which is a super spot. If one of you want to go head out that way, I really, really recommend it. Fabulous place, tiny little island, volcanic. So you get all of these basalt formations like you get on the Giant's Causeway in Northern Ireland. Then it was a very short hop to Madeira, which I thought was a combination of being Himalayan and with these steep valleys with clouds at the top, and little tiny hamlets dotted up this really steep sides, as well as being somewhat Caribbean, as you can see, palm trees, sunshine, the rest of it. Yeah. So what's the reflection? What did I learn from that? And it's again, as the introduction, it's all about trying to progress but not go crazy, step by step. I've really found quite hard about when to leave the weather forecast. We actually ended up bringing it forward by a couple of days, mainly because it looked like we were going to get hit by some strong winds on arrival if we left it later. Making that step offshore, yeah, could I have done it on my own? I don't know, or probably, but really having somebody else, a second brain, a second pair of hands, somebody you could trust and rely on, really, really helped. I learned the weather forecast. Clearly, the weather forecast is key. We all know that. But unlike the Med, where I'd spent a lot of time, it doesn't change very fast. And our forecast was pretty accurate. If it was going to change, it changed for the worse or for the better relatively slowly. Whereas in the Mediterranean, things can turn on the flick of a switch. I hadn't sailed hardly. I'd done one day with sailing with Alan prior to heading offshore, and I was seasick the first day. So after day 2, I was right into the swing of it. So it definitely took me a little while to get into the swing of it, especially not having sailed that year until that trip, really. I found the watches switching between us, particularly if you were on watch before midnight. Then Alan did the midnight, then I was back on. I found that exhausting. I actually found sailing solo less tiring than I did those watches. Yeah, I didn't plan to have some means of contact. I chatted to my wife. She was fine me disappearing and letting her know when I got there. But it was a definite plus to be able to let family know how we're doing and also hear from them if they wanted to. And it definitely built my confidence, but the weather was pretty benign. We motored for almost the last day. It was easy stuff, no big seas. So it helped, but I was very conscious that the weather was very benign. So that was my first, what was I say, just under 4 days, first ever offshore, just the two of us, lucky about the weather, learnt a lot. And now I was getting into serious territory. Yeah, Alan was going home. That was always planned, that I really wanted to try and figure this out. If it had all gone pear-shaped, I probably would have got some crew in to help me, but it hadn't. So now here I was. How do I get back? So direct or somewhere else. But before I dive into that, I've got a question for you. And it's this. Any golfers out there? What's the most difficult distance when you're playing golf? You can shout out your answer. I won't hear you, but you can shout it out anyway. Long, short? I'm not really a golfer, but most golfers will tell you it's the short distances. In particular, the distance between your ears. And I think sailing is like so many things in life. It's a lot of it is in your head. You can do a lot of this stuff, It's just, do you have the confidence? Have you gone about it the right way? Where's your head at? And I'll share more about that later, because I do think there's a certain amount of competence clearly required, and there's also an awful lot of mental state in sailing offshore, particularly on your own. So let's go back to this question. How do we get back? Well, I figured out a direct route. This time of the year, the winds are typically from the northerly component, either northwest or northeast or slightly northwest. So I was probably, if I tried to go back the direct route, I'd have been into wind the whole way, probably taking forever to get there. So it rapidly became clear this was this was true. The direct route's is often not the best. So 500 miles out to the Azores to come back 800 miles, again, first time solo. The 500 miles solo seemed pretty logical. I'd just done almost that with Alan and it was fine. So I thought, well, that's okay. But then I was left with 800 miles back on my own again. So it was a bit of a leap of faith. In some ways, I compare it. In the end, I needed to make this step, sail solo offshore. And it's a bit like parachuting. You can't parachute unless you jump out of the plane. So sooner or later, I was going to have to jump out of the plane. My jump was the first jump, 500 miles off to the Azores. And then let's see what happens after that. So that was my plan, really. As I said, it's very much, I think it's a lot of a head game, keeping your, so I had some simple things to help me along. I wrote a list of things next to the radio, you can see here. Some of the practical things to check. Are the bilges dry? What about the engine liquids, battery? I store all my veg down in the bilges, check that you haven't gone rotten, things on deck, etc. So really very practical. I'm a very practical person. And then I went for the mental stuff, which you can barely see down here. I added these two. Are you tired and are you having fun? And those are probably better questions to ask than all the other dry stuff about what's the boat doing. Both are important. So that was one mental aid. And the other was this one, which I stick next to my next to the radio as well, above the chart table. Not for all the technical stuff. I like to have this stuff to remind myself of the strength of the wind, etc., to put in the log. But for the smart words of Mark Twain, who said this: "I've had a lot of worries in my life, most of which never happened." And now I keep looking at that every day, multiple times. I'm not a worrier by nature, but I did find myself thinking about stuff I really shouldn't have been worrying about. So the first leg offshore solo turned out to be this one. This is from Madeira, fabulous marina in Porto de Lorde on the end of Madeira. Good shelter, good spot. And it was going to be 500 miles off to Santa Maria, the southernmost island of the Azores. Just as a reminder to myself and to you, this was 3 times the distance of anything I'd done solo before. So not crazy, but a step. Fairly straightforward in many ways. This was, basically round the corner, head off, 500 miles off to the top left of the slide. You'll find Santa Maria. The weather forecast was as shown, expected to be. And so off I went. As I rounded the big question for me, because I was sheltered here in the marina, big question for me was, is the weather going to be what it said it was going to be? As I rounded it, it was really lumpy, which turned it out to be wind over some local current. And then as we progressed along the coast, slowly the weather conditions, as the winds were free to do their thing, the weather conditions were pretty much as they said. A bit confused seas to start with, and then things started to settle down, and I was away. It was a good weather forecast, fairly moderate winds, okay seas, and we were away. So people say, well, what's the biggest hazard? And for me, there were two. The first big one was these guys, fishing boats with no AIS. And the other hazard was probably me, just keeping myself not doing something stupid. But just to comment on the fishing boats for a second, I learned this the hard way. I was asleep below, came up on deck, had my AIS alarm on, hadn't gone off, came up on deck in the dark, looked to the starboard side, slightly to my starboard behind me, and spotted this fishing boat had going past, just its lights. I went, oh my goodness, what happened there? That didn't trigger any alarm, and it's there, but so that was, I was like, oh, but I've missed him, so it's fine. So I went back down below, and then I thought, hang on a second, you didn't really had a good look there. I went back on deck, looked off to starboard, and behind this boat, this fishing boat, were small pins of light in the sea trailing behind him for miles. And I realized those were his nets, and there was me heading towards them. So quick adjustment, of course. And that was a real lesson. One, AIS doesn't always work with fishing boats, and the second was, for goodness sake, take a proper look. Then I get asked, often, so every single solo sailor gets asked the question, well, how did you manage with sleep? This is going to be 4 days and a bit, single-handed. This is the layout in my boat. You can see I use the 2 berths in the saloon, both the starboard and port berths. Both of them have lee cloths, although they did need a bit of fiddling around with to get them to be of any use. So I would suggest you test those in anger before you depart. And what I did, and everybody has a different answer to this, a typical sleep cycle, if a full sleep cycle lasts about an hour and 30 minutes for most people, plus or minus. So I set my alarm clock for an hour and 50 minutes, put the AIS alarms on, once or twice used radar, and put my head down, and would get up, check deck, then go back to sleep, set it again, do the same, and that surprisingly worked well. Most of the time, I woke up before the alarm went off, which is surprising for me. I love my sleep. So I was really surprised how well this worked for me. So that's what I did. I didn't hesitate to go down below, get my head down, strip off completely into a decent bed to try and tell my body you can go to sleep. And then a couple of pictures from being en route. You can see how innocuous it was. I managed to get the cruising chute up, not something I'd flown a lot on my own. More of that later. So fairly easy. You can see we got some squalls along the way, kept myself busy. Here I was practice using the radar to track the squalls, trying to dodge them, find my way through them. So it kept me occupied as well. Had some great company with some loads of dolphins, including these little guys, which are the Atlantic spotted dolphins. And then before you knew it, there we were in approaching Santa Maria as about a four-day passage. Again, I was lucky with the weather, or maybe I just did. I picked the right time to go. What is it? Luck is when inspiration meets perspiration, something like that. Some smart person said. And I was arriving here, as you can see, just as you could still see the lights of the harbour. So it's just starting to get light. So that was my first solo 4-day, 500 miles solo offshore in mid-Atlantic. Lessons from that one, also some good lessons. I definitely prepared the boat well. It had helped that I'd done the trip with Alan. I was well rested as well before the trip. I'd learned more and more about the boat, just being I knew the boat pretty well, but I was still learning stuff. I kept myself really busy. It was amazing how quickly the time goes. I never read anything. Was always busy or just taking it all in. I've already mentioned the fishing vessel. Don't forget the nets. Keep in mind they may not have AIS. And that last slide I just showed before was a reminder that I could have been arriving in the dark and I hadn't prepared a lights list. Typically we're so reliant on our chart plotters, etc. these days. It wouldn't have done any harm to prepare a lights list. Good preparation. Should have done that. Had some confidence, but still being quite cautious because this is early days for me, of course. And I was very aware I was on my own. Am I fit enough? Am I making sure I don't take too many risks? And so here we were, Santa Maria, fabulous little island, very exposed, very sheltered here. This is on the south side of the island, on the left-hand side of the picture. But there was a third pontoon in this harbour a year ago, and then previous winter they had a massive storm and it got completely from the southwest, so it got completely destroyed. So with 2 breakwaters, so it just shows you how bad the weather can be. And the other side, there was an anchorage. You could have stopped at an anchorage. Lovely spot, a really unspoiled part of the Azores and the southernmost island. So I'd made it. I'd made it to the Azores. This is the Azores. For those who are less familiar with the archipelago, San Maria in the southernmost, Flores in the far west, and everything in between. I'd planned to hopefully maybe spend a bit of time, but to me, this was more about testing myself seeing if I can do the sailing. This wasn't a holiday destination. And I'll explain, I ended up not staying there very long for a number of reasons. So that was one look of the Azores. The other, this is what it looks like on Find My Friends that my family was seeing where I was. So we look on the chart and you go, yeah, I'm out here. And then you look back, zoom out, and you're right in the middle of the Atlantic. I'm still quite proud of that in so many ways. It's just a reminder it was a reminder of how removed I was. And then I moved on to San Miguel, the biggest island of the Azores. There's definitely something for everyone. The volcanoes, tea plantations, waterfalls, fabulous place. Destination in its own right. If you can arrive there by boat, maybe a little more romantic, but still a great holiday destination. And then, I'm building and building for the big one. For the big one for me, 800 miles in the Atlantic on my own. Lots of people just head off and just do it. Well, I was trying to take this in a more steady approach. And this slide's worth probably talking over a little bit. It's a simple slide, but it talks to trying to, what have I learned? Get your plan B's, just think about it. So I was heading from San Miguel somewhere back to the Portuguese or Spanish coast. So the first question really is, there's a few things to talk about: destination, alternatives, weather, strategy, and any other thoughts. So let's talk about destination first. I was planning to be in the Arias later in the year, so I'd have loved to have got to Vigo, but everybody told me that's going to be too much into wind. I didn't want to go back to Portimao. That felt like mission unaccomplished. So Lisbon was my target. If there was any chance of getting further north of Lisbon, then I would have taken it. So that was roughly and if things turned out badly, the big red arrow here is, back up. The 2 blue arrows are the prevailing winds for this time of the year. And then as you close the coast, you can expect, possibly with land effects, heat effects from the land, strong northerlies. So my destination, if things were really bad and I couldn't get into Lisbon, was back round the corner and into Portimao, which I knew. So that was my bad weather plan. If things went wrong, I could go round the corner, and that would be good. Otherwise, Lisbon. Otherwise, gold would have been going for Vigo, but very unlikely. So that was kind of destination and on alternatives. Yeah, wind, as I said, was like this. And I spotted a weather window, which is why I didn't stay around for very long. A weather window of a low pressure coming above to the north of us, which would give me a tailwind potentially to get me on my way, rather than potentially having to be a bit more into wind. So I saw this tailwind possibility, and that was one of my considerations. In terms of route strategy, I'm used to sailing kind of waypoint to waypoint, I guess, like many of you, or maybe not. And this time it's like, okay, I'm just going to craft a course. I want to be north of Lisbon. I don't want to be battling into wind to get into Lisbon. So I want to try and get north of Lisbon as I close the coast. So take the north when I can, otherwise head towards Lisbon, try and head of a line north of Lisbon and curve my way around and then back into Lisbon. And I can worry about the TSS, traffic separation zone, which I've highlighted just outside of Lisbon. I can worry about that when I get there. And as I said, low pressure coming gave me a tailwind. I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes on weather forecast. This is not a session on weather forecasting. It just maybe will push you in the direction of maybe you want to go and check a few things. How do I get the weather? I really like, and everybody has their favorite. I tend to use PredictWind on their offshore app on my iPad. As I said, I didn't have a way, and I still don't have a way of getting weather offshore. So I downloaded it for 7 to 10 days, thinking that's probably reasonably okay. I really recommend this PredictWind subscription with a weather routing and departure planning option. It's really, really worth having. They have lots of different models for weather, with some really weird letters behind them. UKMO might be more obvious. ECMWF is probably not so obvious. Understand those a little bit. Definitely pay attention to not just the wind, but the waves and the swell. And I'll mention tabular data in a second. So again, I'm not going to spend long on this, but I do want to really, really encourage anybody planning to do a trip like I do, or take a step to make sure you understand the weather. This is what PredictWind typically looks like. Not when I went. This is November. You can see the strong southwesterlies. These on the bottom right, PWG, PWE, etc., are the different forecast models. They're all a little bit different. You might choose your favorite. Some of them are combined. I won't go into it here. We don't have time. But just go and understand those, and I'll give you some links to it in a second. And I mentioned the departure and routing models, which you can do with PredictWind. They can show you your track, etc. And to do that, you need to load into PredictWind the polars, the performance data for your boat. They will have lots of presets, so you could probably get one close enough to your boat, or you can load yours in yourself. Mine's a Malo. They had a default for a Halberg Grassi, which would be quite similar. And this is what I mean by tabular data. So if you've plugged in the performance of your boat and you get the weather forecast and you use their departure planning and weather routing, they will tell you what you might expect along the way. They do this lovely graphic thing with the boat animated across the sea. Looks great. Forget that. Go and dive into the table and it will tell you roughly what seas are you going to see. I'm sorry about the quality of this graphic, but it will tell you for different departure times, what's the wind, what percentage is the wind over a certain speed, so certain strength, sorry. Will tell you the wave heights, which is interesting. 3 meters, 2 meters. Are you going to get 4 meters, or are you going to get less? So really, really valuable information to help you work out when it's a good time to depart. So don't have time to go into that in more detail. I'll give you some links at the end of the presentation. But I really, really encourage you. Weather is so critical. You've got to know it inside out. No excuses. There's so many aids these days. So with that, I was ready to go. I'd cooked some food. This is leaving the northern, sorry, the eastern end of San Miguel. You see steep green, cloudy. That's coming from the low pressure. And off I went. You really don't get a sense here. I had one really tough night. You can see the waves are 2.5 meters probably here, but a period time between the peaks of about 10 plus seconds. So it was okay. Got 1 or 2 waves in the cockpit. The boat handled it really well. The strongest wind I saw was probably 4.6. So the weather was okay, although I was always worrying about it. And I had 2 technical problems and one other, because everyone, what were the issues? One of them was really simple. It was stupid. So this is the main sheet on the controls the boom on the Malo on what's called the target arch at the top. And I'd allowed the main sheet line to get twisted. So a really classic case of a simple error that compounded itself to a bigger error. And that gnarly night I just mentioned, I should have been put in another reef, but I couldn't. I was going downwind and I like to center the boom, take the reef in, and I could not center the boom because of the twists in these lines. So that was a big lesson learned. The first thing I did the next morning, I heaved to, dropped the mainsail, tied the boom off, and sorted it out. But small mistake could have been really, really difficult. And the other one, oh man, this was horrible. I got the cruising chute up. I'd got classic light winds behind me, 8 knots-ish, would have been perfect cruising chute. Went to put the cruising chute up, was too cautious. I blanketed it too much behind the mainsail. And by the time I got back to sheet it in, it had wrapped itself around the forestay. So not only had I got no cruising chute, I had no jib either. And I was completely beside myself. I had, for a while, I had no idea how I was going to solve it. And of course, cool head prevailed eventually. And after 2 hours, 2.5 hours, I managed to get the damn thing down and be away again. But it was painful because the mistake was because I was too cautious. And the rest of the day, it would have been perfect sailing conditions for the cruising chute. So that was a hard lesson. And the other one, I mentioned it earlier, is I found myself constantly worrying about those strong winds potentially at the coast of Spain when I arrived after 6 days. I was always thinking about it. And I struggled to keep myself in the moment to enjoy it. I suppose it's not surprising. All of this is new to me. I mentioned I paraglide. So when I took my first paragliding high flights, I'd scared stupid. And now I love it most of the time. So trying to keep my head in the right space and stop worrying about things I can't control and that were several days away. And finally, I kept saying it to myself. And finally, I sat there, put my headphones on, and just enjoyed it. Listened to some music, and I'd almost had tears rolling down my face with the emotion and the enjoyment of the moment. But it was a hard mental state to get myself in to enjoy it. Yeah, it was poignant. Anyway, but a couple of slides as we start to get towards the end and head towards your questions. Thanks for bearing with us. A couple of slides en route, better weather, wind has moved around. I managed things like jibing in the night in those 2.5 meter swells, which I was scared of doing off Ibiza. Enjoyed some fabulous sunsets. You can see the big swell here because you can't see the horizon. Here's what the boat looks like. Again, heading towards sunset. What she looks like from the bow. I've got a solar panel at the back for a bit of extra power. this portable one solar panel, which I lay out on the deck, works really well, actually. Just need to be careful you do it under the right weather and you don't have to go up and deck and trample all over it, things like that. And then my last test really was the traffic separation zone coming into Lisbon. And I share this because it just shows you a few things. The value of AIS once more. This TSS, by the way, is about the width of the whole of the English Channel, near enough. It's about 26 miles wide. And you can see on this the boats, the other huge cargo vessels coming up and highlighting if they're going to be close to me. So if most of you will know it, but if you haven't got AIS and get a transceiver, a transmitter and a receiver if you're going offshore, fabulous aid these days to be able to navigate across TSS, because it's the ships closest, furthest away that are going to be the problem to you. The ones close by you're not going to hit. It's the ones you can barely see that are steaming up at speed and you can't see them, and you're going to have quite a close closing distance. And then this is the last few miles of those strong winds I was expecting. It was classic back to Mediterranean sailing, really. It was the gustiness of the wind. It would short, choppy seas, and the winds would be 15 knots 1 minute, over 20 knots the next minute, back down again, back up again, back down again. And offshore, they were nothing like that. They did not flip on and off. They just were steady. They'd strengthen or they'd die away. I was cursing this, frankly, but most people would say this was lovely sailing. Look at the weather, it's sunny, it's not raining, you're coming in. I think probably I just wanted it to be, I wanted to be there, but it was a reminder. But that's what I'd been worrying about, and it was, in the end, it was nothing. So here I am at the end, really. Am I a real sailor? Unshaven? Maybe. I don't know. I'm still working this one out. And to leave you with a few additional thoughts, some things I think you really should have if you're heading out that way. It's certainly a good autopilot. I'd replace mine much heavier duty than the one before. I will be installing a wind vane in the spring this year. A transponder I mentioned. Yeah, I don't understand why you would just buy a receiver. It's up to you, I suppose, in the end. Good to tell other people where you are. I totally believe I have a chart plotter down below, and I use an iPad as well so 2 electronic independent means of navigating plus a chart is my mantra. If you can afford it, and I know everybody, you have to have a budget at the end of the day. If you can afford radar as well as AIS, then I would really, really encourage it. These days, they're so good, low power consumption. Yes, they're expensive, but they're very smart. Simple stuff for single-handing. Some midship cleat for me, is an absolute must come into harbour. I don't know how I could do without it these days. And simple things, tea bags, pot noodles, and wet wipes. Simple stuff makes your life much more comfortable. And to finish with a confession, really, I said I was single-handed. Well, I was, but I wasn't solo. For 5 of those 6 days, this collared dove sat in my cockpit. And I ended up feeding him, talking to him or her. So now I'm left with the question, if I wasn't really solo, maybe I need to go and do it again. So if you've, I'd suggest for those of you listening, maybe I hope I've inspired some ideas or sparked some ideas. If you've got a reasonable level of experience, you can decide what an appropriate boat is. Weather. If you've given enough thought, those plan Bs, etc., and if you can get your head to stay in the right spot, then I would say it's absolutely huge rewarding, and you can do it. I'd never done anything more than 33 hours, not offshore, and I worked my way to what was a 800-mile, very rewarding trip. And literally the last slide before I hand back to Paul, some things that might help you. Take a screenshot of this if you're there. Obviously, PredictWind has their own videos. I really like this guy on YouTube. I don't have any affiliation to him. Fabulous videos on about PredictWind, weather routing, and some things to watch out for, which you don't find on PredictWind themselves. So really, really recommend that. Some great books that are listed here. There's very few written about marine weather. If you're a real techie, get Modern Marine Weather by David Birch. It is quite technical, but you might work your way through it. A couple of people have already been asking some questions. I know there's some depressing books on heavy weather sailing, but John Kretschner's books on sailing a serious ocean is I think is very, very practical. And don't forget, in this day and age of Gribs and everything else, you can still download and get access to classical weather charts from the US, from the NOAA site. So with that, I hope you've stayed with us. I hope I've kept it moving along at a reasonable pace. I hope I've shared some thoughts and ideas and maybe given you some encouragement to, if this is for you, or maybe there's some things you can take for yourself if you're sailing offshore or heading offshore with crew as well. Some of this equally applies. Whatever you're doing this sailing season, I wish you a fabulous sailing season. And with that, Paul, I'll stop sharing and hand back to you.
A huge thank you there, Martin. That was thoroughly entertaining and full of great facts. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to cover this subject off. But there's been a couple of questions in about how you got insurance, and I'll let you say your story. But I'm just going to cover up with regard to the insurance. The insurance market is changeable. It depends on things that sort of happen on a year-by-year basis. And for offshore, long-term, single-handed voyages, insurance can be very hard to obtain. It's not an easy thing. And the only thing I can suggest that people do is go to a specialist broker who has access to a range of insurers who might be able to find a place where they can place it, who may be more accepting of the risk. And that would be the best chance of getting cover. I mean, we've got our three brands, as I said at the beginning. We've got Heaving, Knox-Johnston, Core, which does have restrictions on single-handed sailing, but our specialist offices, they have access to a lot more insurers. And if any, I'm not saying they will be able to help you, but if anyone can, they sort of can. But Martin, how did you find with regard to getting onto insurance?
Yeah, I knew from searching around, the internet and forums and everything else. And I asked a few people, and loads of people said it was problematic, and it was. And then the light bulb went off, and the CA has this relationship with Avon Knox-Johnston. So you were the guys I went and asked about it, and you came back with some ideas. I stressed to the audience, it's just a happy coincidence. We've come full circle, Paul. Neither I nor you knew we'd end up doing this conversation. But yes, it isn't straightforward. And everybody will have their own view on insurance. To me, it was a must-have. And with your help, I found it. So yeah, it's not straightforward, but it's not a reason to give up. So I'd leave it at that.
Thank you. Tell us a bit about the Cruising Association, Martin, before we move on.
Yes, sure, Paul. Thank you. I mean, yeah, we have a good collaboration. I joined the Cruising Association when I retired, really, and I stumbled across it by accident almost. I was looking for a place to get information, etc. I'll say it really short. I think the CA is really a unique sailing club for this reason. It doesn't, one, you don't have to do some sort of fancy qualifying passage. You just pay your membership. It doesn't matter where you live. So most people will own a boat and join a sailing club close to where they have their boat. You can move around and join the CA. Doesn't matter whether you're in the southwest of England, Thames Valley, Scotland, Celtic, wherever, or even like me in Switzerland. There's a social group, which I really like. I think most people join for both the social network, which in winter you get the chance to link up with people doing talks local to where you might live or on Zoom. Then there's a group, if you're living in London and cruising in the Med, you'll have a cruising group in the Med that you can link up with. If you're living in Scotland and cruising in the Baltic, there'll be a group cruising in the Baltic. So I think it's unique. Whether you move around or wherever you cruise, you can stay with the same sailing club and have a great social contact, loads of good information, discounts and the rest of it. And I think it's well worth the money. I'll keep it short at that. It's not a big sale. Give it a try.
Yeah, we've been asking people to sort of type in questions all the way through. There's been a couple that come in. There was one I probably should have interrupted you on, but
no, I was in full flow.
There wasn't a natural gap, but I mean, Ian McKay has asked a question. He's asked if you'd elaborate on the issues you had heaving to.
Yeah, it's a good question, Ian. Yeah, I think, I'd heave to many times, and my boat just, every boat is slightly different. Mine's 12 tons, 39 feet, so quite heavy displacement, full half skeg rudder, so just some technical aspects. I'd heave to before in 3s and 4s with the classic mainsail, jib backed, etc. But when I found the wind much stronger, and I did that even with 3 reefs in the mainsail and the jib backed, and it was a smaller jib, the bows kept playing through the wind and would start heading off on the other tack. What I later learnt, and it's worth practicing, is I could drop the main completely and the boat would heave to under just the jib. And other people would tell you some boats will heave to in strong winds just under the mainsail, maybe with 3 reefs in it. So Ian, what I'd suggest to answer your question for others is go and try it in 4s or 5s, somewhere you don't have to go far out. Pick a time when there is a bit stronger wind and just play around and find out how your boat heaves to in different strengths of wind. And you'll find it is different in a force 3 and a 4 versus a 5-6.
Thank you. Just before I forget, but there was one of the questions that came through on insurance was from a Brian Ingle, who is, I think he said he was in Porto Santos as we speak, so he's dialing in from one of your slides.
Oh wow! Yeah, he may find the wind coming from a completely different direction right now. He probably needs to head north.
And a question I've got a couple of questions from Miles. Bad weather tactics. Are you a fan of lying a hull or run downwind? He has a Contessa 26 and thinks you would lie a hull well, or is there a risk of broadside?
Yeah, it's always hard to comment on specific boats, right? And again, a bit of a disclaimer. I can only share with you what I can. I can't be an expert on every boat, and I can only share with you my experience is. I've not had to really manage anything above a force 6, so I'm cautious to be so definitive. But Miles, I mentioned John Kretschner's book. I'd really recommend his. He suggests the following, and I would agree with this from practice. Heave to first. Every boat and a Contessa with the weight it is and the keel and everything else should be able to heave to fine. So that's an absolute first. The second, maybe running off, but you need to know your boat well. Have you got crew? Will your wind vane or auto helm manage it? Because it's going to be tiring. Is there enough sea room, etc. So running off might be okay, and certainly other boats, not Contessas, maybe a Beneteau and others with spade rudder might find it, and with crew can manage that. Kretschner strongly recommends in his book, with strong winds and strong seas, fore-reaching, which makes a lot of sense, which is really scraps of sail, sailing upwind, taking the wind and the waves just off the bows. So not passive. None of what he's saying is passive. So and that to me makes a lot of sense, because your autopilot and wind vane will be pretty happy steering that course on the boat, and you're taking the waves on the front of the boat, not the back of the boat. But you're talking about, significant weather we're talking about here. And he considers lying ahull, meaning all sails down, batten down below, very passive. He considers that as a last option. And I can personally, I can understand why. So, bit of a long answer. If you're into it, his book is brilliant, Miles. I've got no reward for selling his book, but it's very practical. He goes through storms that he's been through and his explanation. So that would be my 2 cents on that one.
Brilliant. I mean, you look at it, and I'm going to use this example because I can. Because you look at when Enns and New Zealand and Sir Robin was coming back, they were just trailing miles of rope out the back of the boat, and someone else has suggested that trailing a drogue or something like that. Is that another option, or?
Well, on the press again, I read a huge amount. I read everything. I read and read and read, and everybody will tell you these days. And it was Montessier in the Globe who first realized, don't slow the boat down, stop trailing warps and sail fast, because it's like the relative velocity. So if you're going slower and a big wave's coming at the back of the boat, you're going to get, sooner or later, you're going to get pooped. So his theory was sail faster, and it's been proven since. The problem for a lot of people is going to be doing that if you've got to be a very good helms person, and if you're on your own, you're going to be knackered, excuse me. So I think for a lot of people, running downwind for any length of time is if you're on your own, is just a no-no. You could probably do it for a quick squall. Again, Kressner talks about that, if you've got a quick squall going through. But if you're going to try and run downwind for a day, you're going to be toast on your own. And so I think a lot of people have said they put Jordan drogues on board and the rest of it. And I'm going from reading. This is not experience. This is going from what I've read, and I've read lots. Is most people are saying don't do that. But everybody, go and do your homework, figure it out. Decide in the end.
Brilliant. And Miles has had a second question. You're going downwind with a preventer rigged and you jibe accidentally. Could that make the broach worse, or?
Yeah, I mean, he sent these. I had a bit of time to think about Miles's question because we saw him a bit ahead of time, because they're great questions. Miles, this is my perspective. So sorry. I think for my take on that, I think you might be confusing two things. My read would be a broach is likely to be caused by having too much sail up, nothing to do with a preventer or a jibe. So the preventer's there to stop the uncontrolled jibe. That won't help you if you got too much sail up, which is going to cause you more likely to broach. And personally, I've tried with the preventer with the classic lines to the bows of the boat and back to the boom. And I found on my boat, I found it a complete pain. You've got lines everywhere. They don't fully do the job. And I went for a boom break. Pick your favorite, which odd or whoever else is out there. The old preventer method of a line to the front of the boat comes from when nothing else was available. It's just like charts and chart plotter. I suggest there's much better technology out there, not expensive, that you can use as a preventer, and it will stop that accidental jibe. The broach, I suggest, and I'm not an expert, is more likely to be caused by too much sail and less the jibe. That would be my take.
Fantastic. We've still got questions coming in. I'm going to apologise now because I'm going to probably mispronounce this chap's name. So Yarrick has asked, did you have self-steering wind vane or just an autopilot?
Yeah, I had just an autopilot. I upgraded it to something meatier to take the weight of the boat. It's a 12-ton boat, and the previous autopilot, the one I talked about, failed. The RAM was not big enough, so I upgraded it to a new autopilot. It's much more efficient from an energy standpoint, but I'm just about to install a wind vane, a hydro vane, because I was just so conscious that if I had it's a long answer, that an autopilot, has so many potential failures. Your house batteries could run out, your wiring could fail, the control head could fail, the RAM could fail, the computer could fail. These days, most of them don't. But if you're on your own, and they do, 6 days without an autopilot coming back is a long way. So
Yeah.
I'm adding a wind vane. If I had my time again, I'd probably install a hydro vane and use a tiller autopilot to attach to the end of the wind vane and use that use the wind vane and then just use a cheaper autopilot. So think about it. It's worth a bit more thought if I was starting again.
That's interesting, Thomas, because again, it's how you build and develop the knowledge, which is what you've shown us throughout. An anonymous attendee says, given your experience and if solo venturing offshore again, would you opt for a smaller, easier to handle long keeler?
Yeah, good question. No, no, the Malo is, I picked the Malo for a couple of reasons. One, it's 39 feet. I think 36, anything more than 39 feet for a single hander is getting challenging. My question when people talk about it is, can you lift the sails off the boat on your own? Good luck if it's more than 39 feet. You won't be able to lift the sails off the boat. So that's my kind of rule of thumb. And no, all of my lines are fed back. All of the lines are in easy reach of the cockpit. It's a small cockpit. It's an aft cockpit. So if I come in stern to, it's easy to jump off the boat. So it doesn't need to be, if it's just me, and obviously I've sailed it with family, so a bit more space is nice. It's amazing how much kit you need to store. So, you do need, if you're talking about sails, food, water, tanks, diesel, etc. I don't know, I wouldn't go bigger than 39 and I'd be perfectly happy between 33 and 39. But in terms of keel and the rest of it, I'm very happy with the Malo or a Halberg Rassi or a Rustler I think all of those. But yeah, who knows?
Good list of well-built boats.
Yeah.
Storm Bait has asked, did you get a wave period forecast? If so, how or from who?
Absolutely, yes. The wave period is important, very important. So 2.5 meters in the Mediterranean with a period, and again, to be technical, for those who don't know, the period is the time between peak to peak or trough to trough of the waves. So you're talking about short waves that you get in the Mediterranean or long rollers that you get in the Atlantic. So yes, it's on PredictWind. The period shows on PredictWind, does on Windy as well, I think. And what you will learn is 2.5 meters and 10 seconds is fine. 2.5 meters and 5 seconds is horrible. So period is everything, as much as height.
Brilliant. And they've asked another question. Did you get your weather forecast through your inReach?
Absolutely no. I really don't recommend. I mean, the inReach, as I learned from Alan, you can basically tell it a couple of waypoints. So you can basically tell it 40 degrees north, whatever. You can give it a spot, and it will tell you the weather at that spot. But an inReach will not give you a forecast of grid files like I showed on the slide. You can't get that on an inReach. So you can, what I'm planning to do is, so I think having weather out at sea would stop me worrying as much as I did. Is use an Iridium Go and download and be able to download from PredictWind a proper grid file forecast that you won't get on an inReach. An inReach will give you a spot forecast. It won't give you a spot weather report. Sorry, it won't give you a weather forecast very well.
Brilliant. Thomas Howard has asked, did you you may have covered bits of this, but this is kind of like collating on demand. Did you have to make any changes to your Malo for single-handed sailing?
Short answer is no. The reefing is single line reefing, which is back to the cockpit, which is mixed advantage. I put Dyneema to reduce the drag. I still wonder about having a hook at the. I'd still wonder if it's the best solution. The short answer is no. Cockpit is easily in reach. I didn't really need to do anything for single handing. The only things for single handing were things like simple stuff, AIS, a remote for the radio in the cockpit, things like that. So you don't have to go below to get the radio.
So not so much stuff on the boat, but stuff.
Not so much just
on the boat.
So other things, yeah. So I use the iPad if I need. I have my new chart plotted down below. I followed Cunliffe's advice. Stick the plotter down below. I think he's smart. Use an iPad if you need something on deck. So that was what I did.
That's a good shout. Kevin has asked, did you have any Orca interactions?
Kevin, yeah. Fortunately, oh man, don't get me going about orcas. No. No, I didn't. I've just been in the rears in the autumn, and they were active in the rears, the Orca, and caused chaos. But I was lucky; I didn't have any issues with them. And my only suggestion is forget the Orca apps. Go to the Orca reporting website, which is Portuguese or Spanish, and they update the information. The app is often not up to date. The CA also has some stuff on Orcas. So the short answer is no, I didn't, but I did follow it very closely. And I could rant and rant about Orcas, but I won't.
Excellent. Anonymous attendees, you've mentioned it, AIS radar autopilot. He's currently upgrading his boat, or they are currently upgrading their boat. Any pointers?
Oh my goodness. Let me give that a look quick. I mean, you'll have the perpetual question. Well, the first is your budget. If you've got money to spend, buy it all. If you've got, is get everything you can. There's this question about. There's always the obvious question: AIS or radar. I would say if you're budget limited, get the AIS, but for goodness sake, get a transponder. Do not get just a receiver, which is telling you where everybody else is, but nobody knows where you are. I don't see the sense in it. The price difference is not that big. So get an AIS transponder. But as I learned, not everything has AIS. And if you're on your own, I did think the radar was valuable. So in the ideal world and money permitting, you'd have both. I think those are the two big ones. The other thing is simple stuff is make sure your autopilot is man enough for the job, for the weight of your boat, because it's very easy for previous owners to have skimped and not bought as good a kit as they should. And then you'll find your autopilot isn't strong enough for the weight of your boat. Yeah, if they've got other questions, more specific, happy to reach out and you can forward it to me.
I mean, there's a couple here. So Chris has asked if the alarm on his AIS is very quiet. Do you have yours amplified?
Oh, that's a great one. Yes, I do. Yeah, he's absolutely right, Chris. You're spot on. For both of mine, I have like two AIS. So I'm also a believe. So my radio has a built-in AIS, at least receiver. Yes, you can get a little buzzer which you can mount in the cockpit linked to your AIS. And often, if you've got a chart plotter, whether it's a B&G or a Ray Marine, if you dig deep enough into their operating handbook, you'll find there's a way to attach an external alarm. And I added a really loud one with a red flashing light as well, so that I knew, because often you put on so many alarms on your boat, you're going, is that the bilge pump? Is that the gas alarm? Is that so for the AIS additional one, I put it with a noise and a red light. So I knew, and it's flipping loud. It'll wake you up from the deepest sleep. So yes, get yourself an external alarm. They cost 10 pounds on eBay or Amazon.
No, that's really good advice because the one thing you don't want to do is sleep when an alarm going off.
Yeah, it's ear splitting.
Um, Again, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing names here. Greth Mitchell has asked, you dropped your rudder as a check before going offshore. Was that a big job?
Uh, it was a big job. It was expensive enough. I mean, I won't. Yeah, it cost me €500 to drop that rudder. So it's heavy. It took two people to lift it. Your main, Greta, your main challenge when you is going to be um, talk to have the yard before you haul it out. Have the yard come and check your rudder because you might need quite a lot of clearance for the rudder stock to get out of the boat. So you might, when they put it on a cradle, it might actually need to be quite high up for you to get the clearance to drop your rudder out. So watch out for things like that. Could save yourself a lot of trouble of them moving your boat around. So that would save you a bit. Mine hadn't. I hadn't dropped it in 10 years, and knowing the previous owner, I doubt he had dropped it. And I thought it was just smart. It cost me €500, and the roller bearings on my rudder were pristine, and it was what 20 years old. And I thought, well, I could have saved myself €500, but actually I was pretty happy to see those bearings, and it was in great nick. So peace of mind, wasn't it? Really.
And did you use Starlink or anything else on board or for internet coverage?
Oh, no, you've done it again. I mean, we just had the can of worms earlier. You've just opened the other can of worms. Uh, I told you I read a lot. I've researched and researched and researched Starlink. Let me try and give a quick, this could last forever. The old big Starlink is too power hungry. Forget it. The Starlink Mini, do your homework. They say it works off 12 volts. It doesn't. You need a 12 volt and it needs some higher voltage to run the Starlink Mini properly. That's not a big problem. You can easily solve that. I think the big question with the Starlink Mini is the subscriptions and will it work offshore? And if it works on the roaming charge within 12 miles of shore, which is the normal Starlink subscription, it will work there, but you have no way of testing it other than going and sailing 50 miles offshore and then checking if the antenna will work pointing in a certain direction or not. It is subject to obstructions, etc. So for me, I've gone backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards. If you want streaming video, the rest of it, then you probably want the Starlink Mini. If you want reliability and the certainty that the thing will work, if it works in the marina if the Iridium Go and others start, things like it work in the marina, it will work 50 miles offshore. You can't be sure of that with a Starlink Mini. So if you want reliability, go that route. If you want high bandwidth, but you're less worried about reliability, then by all means go Starlink Mini. But I'm a little cautious about relying on it for a weather forecast.
You'll be pleased to know that I have kind of two or three questions left. So we're getting to the end. Someone's asked, is it easy to solo on a powerboat? Have you ever done that? Or...
Oh, no, I haven't. No, I mean, the CA, we have the wrong person to ask. We have lots of CA members who are powerboaters. I can't answer that one.
Well, okay, no problem. Well, if in answer to that one, just go to the CA and see if there's someone there who
yeah.
Now, the last question is kind of tying a lot of comments in together. We've had Mark Tanner, who said, I don't have a question, just wanted to thank you for a fabulous presentation. Great practical advice and very inspiring. And Rebecca and Brian over in Porto Santos again. Rebecca says, thank you for your time and sharing so much insight. The big question, non-technical, where next? And Brian from Porto Santo is asking pretty much the same question. What is next?
Those are good closing questions on it. Brian and Rebecca, thank you. I when I was coming back, I was like, when I was partway across that 800 miles, I was like, do I really need to be doing this? Why don't I just go and do something easier? and then within a week, I'm like, okay, what's next? And so I've talked myself into sailing back to the Azores. I didn't spend very long there. So I'm going to go back. My plan is to go back and sail right out to Flores, which is the furthest westerly island, if you remember it on my little chartlet. It's just over 1,000 miles. One of the reasons for that is I'm also a member, without being disrespectful to the CA, I'm also an early member of the Ocean Cruising Club, and I have to do my 1,000-mile passage to qualify, and I can't find somebody who's stupid enough to come with me 1,000 miles. So that's probably Flores, and my wife and daughter are planning to fly out and have a holiday out there. So that's next, and my first job is to go and install the Hydrorain wind self-steering gear in when's that going to be? March, together with a Code Zero, which I bought with the help of a CA discount, to replace my shredded cruising chute. So I've added so it's been a bit of an expensive step, but that's the next step. That's where I'm thinking. And then from there, the current plan is Flores and then up to Southern Ireland from the Azores. So that's my next plan, to answer those questions. So now I've told everybody, I probably have to do it.
Yeah, it's down there. And we've recorded it, so you can't get away.
It can't back out.
I've just finally that Thomas Howard has just joined us, saying just wanted to add his thanks and says it was a great talk. And I'm going to add my thanks and really appreciate the time and effort you've given us today, Martin. The subject's been fantastically interesting, and it just leaves me to say thank you very much.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much to everyone who attended. And
if there is anybody planning to go off to the Azores in late May and wants to sail in company, then somehow get in touch with me. I'd love to hear from you.
Or get in touch with us and we can put you in touch.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Thanks, Gavin. Thanks everybody for joining, and thank you to Havens Knox-Johnston for inviting me and giving me the chance to share with you.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.